The NCAA is making changes with regards to college football rules, and they are changes that will absolutely, one in particular, benefit the BYU football program. We'll do it as soon as tomorrow. We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, some terms apply. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. The NCAA, as I mentioned, is making changes, one of which in particular I think will absolutely benefit the BYU football program. The NCAA obviously is under all kinds of fire, but there have been people telling me, Jake, it's at some point here relatively in your future that graduate assistants, analysts that were hired on as pseudo assistant coaches for coaching staffs, it's only a matter of time until the NCAA approves them to be able to coach on the field. Well, that day has officially come. The NCAA announcing yesterday this. The NCAA Division I Council on Tuesday approved a rule change adopted by the Football Bowl subdivision and the Football Championship subdivision oversight committees to permit any staff member to provide technical and tactical instruction to student athletes. The decision is not final until the meeting concludes Wednesday, aka today. So the change is immediate. It begins today, and what it means is that BYU, all of these analysts they have had on the staff. Let's look at Matt Mitchell as a quarterbacks coach. They've got an assistant to every assistant coach. So the assistant to the assistant, I think that's an Office reference if I recall correctly. But here's the deal. That is going to allow guys like Chad Kauha'aha'a, or Chad K, as most people call him, who's been working with BYU's defensive line as one of the senior analysts on BYU staff. Gary Andersen, in theory, as a consultant as well, who's been hanging around the BYU football program. They all will be able to be out on the practice field coaching up BYU players. That is going to be an advantage for BYU, but it's not just an advantage for BYU because quite literally every other Power 5 program, not a Power 4 program at this point, will be utilizing this. You can imagine that the analysts that Nick Saban hired back in the day that essentially worked behind the scenes to quote unquote rehabilitate their image. Imagine them being able to coach on the field in addition to rehabilitating their image in Tuscaloosa. This is going to have a major impact on the next coaching cycle, and it may have some impacts ahead of the season with some maybe changes in the late stages of the upcoming season. But the bigger point to be made here is it's good for BYU to be on this side of the fence rather than the other one. A lot of you, and trust me, I see the comments. I read all your stuff that you post on YouTube, good, bad, indifferent, whatever you guys have got. I read it all, and I appreciate the feedback. There have been a ton of you, and this is not specific to any single one person. I imagine there's been a lot of folks who have made similar comments talking about BYU, some of the staff changes they've been making of late. Obviously, the most recent ones were dumping Daryl Funk and Steve Clark and then bringing in Kevin Gilbride and TJ Woods on the offensive staff. And the guy that draws the most ire in that circumstance is Daryl Funk. Essentially, a lot of you said, why in the world did Kalani Sitake hire such a poor coach? I'm going to just put it out there right now. Money. It all comes down to money, everybody. I know that sounds way too simplistic, but here's the deal. BYU as a pseudo Power 5 when they were an independent was making decent money, but now that they're actually inside the Power 4 level and making the money that Power 4 programs make, even at a half share currently, still from the Big 12, it's more money than BYU has ever had before. And as such, the money has been able to be allocated for BYU to hire top-tier assistants in their eyes. That's why TJ Woods is finally at BYU at this point. That's why I got Kevin Gilbride is taking a step away from his career in the NFL and was willing to join the BYU staff. They're not coming here out of the goodness of their hearts. I know that BYU wants to be this altruistic, uppity-up place where it means more than cold, hard cash. Not in this day and age, everybody. We have seen BYU investing, and a lot of it is with regards to the amount of money they're investing. You look at the basketball program, Kevin Young, the NIL stuff they're doing on that front. BYU football and their NIL, something I probably should have mentioned yesterday. I was talking about the golf tournament and having conversations around the media golf tournament, is the BYU football. Don't think that they're not getting the money they need to get NIL wise. They have plenty of money in their own right, and they're allocating it to the best athletes as possible to get the best talent to Provo. But the bigger point to be made here is you guys that think that Kalani Sitake was flush with cash and could go out and hire any assistant coach he wanted to when he hired Darryl Funk, simply was not the case. I'm not trying to be a propagandist. I'm not trying to be a homer here. But the bigger point to be made here is BYU now has the money they can go out and pay for Power 5, or I keep saying Power 5, Power 4 level assistants. That's why Jay Hill is reportedly making north of $1 million as a defensive coordinator and associate head coach at BYU. That's why TJ Woods and Kevin Gilbride were willing to come to BYU at this point. They have the cash now to be able to hire those assistants. Will it take some time to rectify some of the woes that came as a result of the issues on that offensive line? Yes, but TJ Woods has been tasked with getting it right. And back to the original point on this change that the Division I Council made to allow guys like Chad Kauha'aha'a and Chad Kauha'aha'a, or also Gary Andersen and any other analysts on BYU staff to coach on the field, Al Pupunu, etc. That is going to have a positive impact for BYU because those guys have institutional knowledge that they can offer, particularly in the case of Gary Andersen and Chad K on the BYU defensive line, helping out Sione Po'uha as well as Kelly Poppinga in terms of getting that defensive line mix right, getting the pass rush up to speed, being able to hold up against the run better against Big 12 competition. These coaching additions, for lack of a better term, the ability for them to be on staff and actually coach on the field as they provide technical and tactical instruction, it means they can coach on the field. That's the biggest point to be made there. Is going to be a major lift for BYU. And the good news is they're still limiting the overall number of FBS staff members who can recruit going out beyond the school's borders. So a guy like Gary Anderson's not interested in traveling all around the country at this point in his career and recruiting every kid under the sun. The fact that he can come to BYU, and this is in theory, same thing goes for Chad K or any, like I said, Matt Mitchell or any of these guys. They can coach at BYU. They can obviously talk with players when they're on campus, maybe on recruiting visits and the like, but they don't have to have the added stress of traveling clear across the country on red-eye flights seemingly every other night, trying to find the best talent, bring it to BYU. Those 11 spots are Kalani Sitake and his quote-unquote 10 official assistants. That is their job at this point. The FBS will remain limited up to 11 staff members to be able to go out on the road and recruit. That is going to be a major lift for all Power 4 programs. There will be coaches at the G5 ranks who are good coaches, who are fed up with the recruiting and having to fight the uphill fight that it is. And the thought process maybe in their mind is, you know what, if I latch on with a P4 staff and I am the assistant tight ends coach, insert whatever position they coach, and I don't have to recruit, I'm all in on that. So BYU, for the first time seemingly in a long time, it's a good thing to be a Power 4 level program at this point for the Cougars. Imagine if they were on the other side of the quote-unquote fence right now and having to deal with the possibility of a Power 4, then Power 5 program plucking talent right off their roster and them being able to make that level of money and it being a no-brainer with regards to not having to recruit. This is going to be an attractive opportunity for BYU and literally other Power 4 program to go out and add talent to their coaching staff and also give them the quote-unquote perk. Not quote-unquote, it's the perk of not having to recruit out on the road. That is going to make, I think, a fundamental shift in how the coaching cycle is going to look in the future and the very near future at that. So interesting times ahead, but it's good to have BYU have this ability to have their analysts and GAs able to coach on the field and practice, etc. And B, to have the money now to go out and attract top-tier talent and find the good coaches that they can find and bring them to Provo, Utah. It comes down to, and I don't want to make it as, like I said, I don't want to make it as simplistic as it is, but really, all of us, we're in it for the money. If I was offered $5 million to go and do literally anything, it feels like, in the world for a job, I'd probably take it. I love what I do. Trust me, I absolutely love what I do in the media sphere, but money talks and it always will. And if you say it doesn't, I would say you're part of the Liars Club. All right, we will flip over and talk about yet another commitment from BYU supersized official visit weekend this past weekend. It came in right after I posted yesterday's podcast. Same thing that happened on Monday night. Who is Kendal Wall? What does he offer to BYU? We're digging into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Of course, if you like to go to MLB games like I do, you want to take advantage of the opportunity to get your tickets from our friends at Game Time. All of us want to get out to the ballpark, enjoy a dog, watch the game. My favorite part about ball games is just the fact I get to relax. I'm still watching high-level sports, but it's not as fast-paced. It's not as intense. I can have a conversation with my family, my wife, my friends who I happen to be there with. That's the best part about this. The Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, so making your MLB tickets as easy to get as possible. And the best part is prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat with the lowest price guarantee as well, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets, and they want you guys to get out to the games. My wife grew up in a Los Angeles Angels fan. There's at some point probably this summer I'm probably have to go down to LA and catch a game there. Love to see the Dodgers as well. Maybe get up to Seattle and watch my Mariners. But the best part is I can save on all of it with our friends at Game Time. So download Game Time app today. Once again, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and save $20 off on your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. You know that is Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of your support. Want to remind you, if you've not done so already, please check out the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also now available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus all of our national shows covering every league you care about as well. Find Locked On Sports Today available now wherever you get your wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube, but also on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, and that's free as well. All right, let's dive in and talk about who Kendal Wall is, the latest commitment for BYU. Now, it's been a really solid week so far for BYU on the recruiting front, bringing in seemingly tight end and then an edge player and then another tight end and an edge player. And don't ask me to describe how BYU is going to fit all these guys in, but the bigger point is that BYU is benefiting from that supersized official visit weekend. A lot of guys coming in, seeing guys that they were hanging out with all weekend long, committing to BYU. And the latest is Kendal Wall. Now, he is a homegrown product out of Mountain Ridge High School. I can be at Mountain Ridge High School from my house in Saratoga Springs, and if I hit all the lights right, 10 minutes, just right up the road. It's right out there on a Mountain View corridor in Harriman. But the one thing about Kendal Wall, if you watch his film, he is a very, very nice edge player, but the comments he made to 24/7 Sports seem to indicate that BYU plans on bulking him up and moving him inside to defensive tackle. Now, currently, as it stands, according to 24/7 Sports, he is a 6'5", 215-pound edge player. So he is a pass rusher, and he shows that on his film. But I also, watching his huddle highlights, I see the ability to be able to anchor down and hunker down against opposing offensive linemen. Now, at 6'5" at the high school level, you're usually playing guys who are shorter than you and already have that natural leverage on you. So it's good to see Kendal Wall understanding angles, understanding leverage, and his ability to take on those blocks and obviously get off them and go make plays. He had 41 tackles a year ago for Mountain Ridge. It's a program that I think is ascending very quickly, quite honestly, in the 6A ranks here in Utah. It's a booming population base in Harriman, and Kendal Wall decided he wanted to stay close to home, and he will be playing for the BYU Cougars. He's got an 86 rating from our friends over at 24/7 Sports. The composite rating a little bit lower though, just 82.44. Now, a couple of you on our Locked On Cougars Insider group over the weekend asked the question. It was a similar question. I'm just going to sum it up by saying this. Jake, you talk about the composite ranking. Can you tell me what the difference is between what you're saying when the 24/7 Sports ranking is and the composite ranking? All right. Let me school you to the game for just a moment here. The biggest thing with the composite ratings is 24/7 Sports, and it's to their everlasting credit. They will put out their own player ratings for players. So in this case, Kendal Wall, he's an upper end 3-star talent, but the composite rating takes into account the other ranking systems out there. Rivals, On3, ESPN, I think are the main three that they take from. And essentially, the composite means that they are looking at those other recruiting services, putting all of their rankings for an individual player together, and the number it spits out is the composite rating. So in this case, Kendal Wall is more highly thought of by the 24/7 staff than the overall consensus is on other websites alongside 24/7 Sports. We talked earlier this week about LaMason Waller. I talked about him being a 4-star prospect. Well, 24/7 Sports has him as a high 3-star. It's like an 88 rating, but the overall composite rating has him as a 4-star. So hopefully that can clear up a little bit of the confusion there. The bigger point to be made here is I trust 24/7 Sports more than the other websites. It's nothing against On3. It's nothing against Rivals. It's nothing against ESPN. I just happen to be a former scout / 24/7 employee, and I understand the way they go about measuring and putting out these player ratings. I trust their ratings more than the other services. Now, that's personal opinion on that front, but I also like to watch the tape of these guys. A lot of you know that I call high school football games during the fall for Deseret News. It was Deseret's News Rewind. It's now KSL Sports Rewind, and I'll be back out there this fall. I just got the good news that I'm going to be part of it again this year. I'm looking forward to that. And the opportunity to go out and see guys like Kendal Wall play here in the Utah Prep ranks, it's one of my favorite things. I love getting my own eyes on these young men and be able to make my own evaluations of it. Like I said, I haven't seen Kendal Wall with my own eyes yet, but his huddle highlights and knowing the talent that he's playing against and matching up against on a week-by-week basis, playing at Mountain Ridge, it indicates to me that he is a guy similar to some of the other prospects BYU's committed from this official visit weekend, that they're looking at it saying, hey, he's got something special here. Let's lock him in, get him in the program, and get the most out of him. I really like what Kendal Wall shows on tape. I said that his comments to 24/7 Sports seem to indicate that he's probably going to end up playing on the interior of BYU's defensive line. But the player comp in that circumstance, if you want one, it's a little bit loose because they're not the same player to me. But remember John Nelson? I remember John Nelson went from defensive tackle out to defensive end and then is now back at defensive tackle. Well, it's going to be, I think, a similar circumstance for Wall if he gains that requisite weight to play kind of that 3/shade 4 technique defensive tackle spot where you're not necessarily the nose tackle playing a 0 or 1 technique. And I know this is really technical jargon for any of you who are not guys who played football or played on the offense and defensive line like I did in high school. But the thing about Kendal Wall is his pass rush ability. And if you pack on, let's say he goes from 215, he's now 275 pounds, 285 at some point in his BYU career. With that height to weight ratio, you can be more than effective. And the fact that he's already 6'5", he's got the wingspan, he's got the pass rushing chops from his high school days. He could be a really, really nice force on the interior of this BYU defensive line. Now, that's projecting ahead. That'd be 60-ish pounds he have to pack on before that comes to fruition. But even if he only gets up to 240, 250, his pass rush ability indicates that he is going to be, I think, a very effective defensive lineman at the next level. Kelly Poppinga, Sione Po'uha, as the guys who are going out and recruiting, are obviously doing their thing. But I would imagine that we just talked about Chad Kauha'aha'a as well as Gary Andersen being able to work with these young men. Guess what? They've recruited this state as heavily as anybody. And when they see talent, they know they can mold it. And that's what BYU is betting on here by getting Kendal Wall into the program. So I think it's a really, really savvy pickup for BYU. Time will tell if the projection and what they're expecting is absolutely dead on. But this is a staff led by Jay Hill on defense in particular for BYU that they rarely miss with their evaluations. So I trust that Kendal Wall will be a part of the mix for BYU in future years for the BYU football program. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to finish out today's show. An interesting dynamic is emerging for BYU baseball and BYU softball, and it's fairly concerning considering these are Power 4 level programs, but apparently their top talent, it's taken off and it's going elsewhere. And we're talking about that next as we wrap up this edition of Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to give a shout out, by the way. I'm wearing this hat today. Frankly, I'm wearing the hat because I was golfing in 100-degree heat and took a shower and didn't do my hair before I recorded the podcast. But I want to give a shout out to the Wasatch Hat Collective. They gave me this hat back in the winter, and I love the design. Come on, look at this thing. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's the old school Lavelle Edwards look from the 90s. Remember those hats? He was wearing those starter hats. I've got actually one of the original starter ones in my collection somewhere here at my house. But I want to shout out the guys at the Wasatch Hat Collective. It's a really, really cool design. It's a very comfortable hat. I'm not being paid to say this. I can tell you straight up, I'm not being, it's not a sponsorship deal or anything of the like, but I really do appreciate them hooking me up with this. And when I needed to toss on a hat, I turned around in my studio here. It was sitting there. So on it went. So there you go. That's why I'm wearing the hat today. But a big ups to Wasatch Hat Collective for hooking me up, and they can hook you up as well. Wasatch Hat Collective on Instagram. I believe there might be also on Twitter, but I know they're on Instagram for sure. Also, a quick reminder, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the latest I'm hearing on BYU sports, and we'll do that. It comes in a text message to your phone. Click the link in the show notes below, and you can get joined up right away. All right. Final couple of notes before we go on today's show is there is an emerging trend for BYU baseball and BYU softball that I am mildly concerned about, and mildly is probably putting it lightly. Here's the deal. BYU baseball and BYU softball were two of the programs when BYU made the transition to the Big 12 that I was worried about the most. In the interest of full disclosure, my wife is a former BYU softball player, played all 4 years of her career, funny enough, in 4 different conferences. That was kind of that era for BYU softball. They were nomads when BYU was playing in the West Coast Conference before the West Coast Conference created its own softball league. BYU played in the Mountain West, the WAC, I think it was like the MPSF, and then finally her final year was the first year of the West Coast Conference tournament of that era. So the bigger point to be made here is those two programs are going to be up against it to compete at a high level in the Big 12. Well, it's going to be doubly hard when the talent you're developing in your program takes off and heads to the Southeastern Conference. And it's happened 3 times in the past 2 weeks for BYU baseball and softball. It started off, we've talked previously about this, about Kauha'aha'a, Big 12, all Big 12 freshman honoree, just an absolute big bat for the BYU lineup. Well, he joined his brother at Arkansas, joining the Razorbacks, which is one of the better programs in the SEC. Earlier this week, also Cullen Reuter, who was BYU's standout catcher, was a really, really solid player, was an honorable all Big 12 selection, 10 home runs, 28 walks, 8 doubles, and 860 OPS for BYU this past season. In Big 12 play, his numbers actually were 311 batting average and an impressive 1.054 OPS. So an absolute star for BYU baseball. He takes off and he goes closer to his home state by ending up with Ole Miss. He's from Magnolia Branch, Mississippi. So he's going home in a way, but losing his talent is a big blow for Trent Pratt and the BYU baseball program, combined with Kauha'aha'a, who came in and was a freshman sensation. So you lose those two guys to the SEC. And then just yesterday, BYU softball gets rocked as BYU shortstop star Ilana Agbayani commits to Oklahoma, of all places. Now, I am not going to fault any one of these athletes for chasing their dreams. There are reports out there that BYU, the NIL sphere on baseball and softball still has a ways to go. And Oklahoma softball, it is the preeminent program in the country. I can't blame Ilana Agbayani for wanting to play for the Sooners. They have got elite facilities. They've got the best coaching. They've got the best overall investment, it feels like, in the sport. But if BYU truly wants to compete in these sports, and I have belief that Tom Homo wants BYU softball and BYU baseball to be competitive at minimum in the Big 12 Conference, you got to keep the talent in Provo. This is a concerning trend. It's just 3 players. Let me be very clear about this. But here's the thing. All 3 of them, all Big 12 honorees. I forgot to mention Agbayani for BYU softball. She was an all Big 12 first-team honoree this season. That is an elite talent exiting BYU and exiting stage right and going and joining the best softball program in the country at Oklahoma. Once again, I can't fault the athletes, but BYU needs to be able to be competitive, and having talent is going to be imperative to any hopes they have of competing at that level. Is there a perfect solution for it? I would be all ears to hear it. Frankly, I just don't know unless there are some big, deep-pocketed boosters that are all of a sudden BYU softball or BYU baseball fanatics and want to invest on the NIL front for those two programs. That may change the conversation. But until that time, could be tough sledding for Trent, Pratt, and also Gordon Eakin as head coaches of the BYU baseball and softball programs, respectively. All right. There you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Wednesday edition of the show. So a big thank you, as always, for your support. Thank you for all of your feedback. I love seeing it. It's always kind of funny to see the disparity in how people perceive different things that I say on a daily basis. But hey, it's why this podcast is as successful as it is because of you guys. So thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well. And until tomorrow, have a great rest of your Wednesday. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.